of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
This is a government license, and the public, as well as other competitors, have a right to know how this went down.
Tonight on Politics Now, more than 6 conditional licenses for pot dispensaries are issued, so why won't the state tell us who they went to?
At the end of that primary campaign, you never endorsed Steve Sisolak?
No, I did not.
County Commissioner, former Assemblywoman and gubernatorial candidate Chris-June Kiliani sits down with Steve Sebelius. She talks about the recent campaign and what is in store for her next. And from Paul Laxalt to John McCain to George H.W. Bush, we remember some of the iconic politicians who passed away this year.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius and Patrick Walker.
State regulators have selected another bunch of applicants to receive dispensary licenses. Thanks for joining us. I'm Patrick Walker. Steve is off this week. Well, just like the first time back in 2013, there is controversy over the licensing process, but this time around, just not for the same reasons. By this time next year, the number of marijuana dispensaries in the Silver State could roughly double.
We fill out applications, and it's very, very thorough.
Sahara Wellness and co-owner Brenda Gonzalez received one of 61 provisional licenses to open a new dispensary.
I think this industry has come a long way, and I feel like that we all have, the Department of Taxation, the city, everybody has really joined together to make this industry something that we all can be proud of.
Sahara Wellness was one of the first dispensaries to open its doors in Clark County nearly 3 years ago. Euphoria Wellness was the first dispensary to open in Clark County and second statewide back in 2015. Its application for more licenses was denied. The same is true for newcomer Planet 13 and its sister dispensary, Medizin. Why? Well, there's no answer to that right now because the state isn't releasing a list of who the provisional licenses went to, nor how applicants fared in the scoring process.
This is a government license, and the public, as well as other competitors, have a right to know how this went down.
Attorney and outgoing State Senator Tick Segerblum, who's heading to a seat on the Clark County Commission, is the lawmaker who's been behind the rise of the Silver State's cannabis industry. He says privacy regulations were intended to protect sensitive information.
We wanted to make sure that the financial information, your tax returns, that type of stuff was confidential.
Segerblum says at the very least he will push for public disclosure of applicants and their scores at the local licensing level. Well, a spokesperson for the State Department of Taxation says some preliminary information about those licenses is in the works. We have filed public records requests to gather more information about those provisional licenses that the department has issued so far. Well, from State Assemblywoman to County Commissioner, Chris-June Kiliani, she has been in public service here in Nevada for nearly 3 decades. Now, after a run for governor, she's moving on to the next chapter of her life. Steve Sebelius talked with her about that and about the election.
You are now at the end of a career that spans about 28 years, both in the legislature and in the Clark County Commission, but I don't think you're ready to quit yet, right? What do you got next?
Well, I started a political action program. First time ever. I didn't believe in PACs because I don't think you should use money that way.
Right. This is a PAP, not a PAC.
Yeah, this is going to be for scholarships and internships for students. And then I'm going to form an institute or a center of actual leadership, civics, and campaign training, as well as not just for running for office, but running the campaigns. We don't grow our own here all the way around. We import people from all over the United States. So I'm thinking that that would be a nonprofit component, and then I'd have the political action component to be able to do the skill set for some of the youth.
It's interesting because so many times we see the Democratic establishment, the DCCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, insist on bringing their people in and kind of shutting local people out. There's plenty of Democratic consultants here, but they're kind of shut out of these campaigns because the national committees say if you want our money, you have to use our people.
Exactly.
So do you think this institute would be a counter to that?
Absolutely. And it's not to compete, it's just to say we should grow our own. We have talent in this state. I went door to door after the primary with and walked for just about every woman around the state of Nevada. And I was running into, I come into a building building over off of, and was this Democratic, and one person was from Clark County or Nevada.
Wow.
Everybody else in that building, all on phones and doing computer work, were from out of state. Why aren't we growing our own as far as that's concerned? So I think the school teacher side of me still wants to make that available, and I think it helps us be competitive. I want to focus on women, young girls, communities of color, LGBTQ, so that they have a voice and a pathway. Not everybody has to run for office. You could actually be trained on how to run the campaigns, whether it's for field, technology, social skills, all those pieces. And you know as well as I do, even in K-12, as much as you support government or civics, it's not on the test, so it really doesn't get incorporated. So I want to focus on some of that as well.
Now, at the end of that primary campaign, you never endorsed Steve Sisolak?
No, I did not.
Would you mind telling us who you voted for? Did you vote for him in the election?
I'd rather not state, but I know I did not. I did not vote for Adam Laxalt. So
I was going to say I've known you for almost all of these 27 years, and I couldn't picture that going on. But
Steve didn't really need my endorsement.
Yeah.
I always felt that the people that had gravitated to me would vote Democratic no matter what. He took 6 weeks to even call and talk to me or leave me a message. So you know that was. And
it was a very bitter primary. I mean, was that part of the reason that you didn't endorse it? Just the how personal it got.
Yes, that was a great deal. The lies about my husband, and then the fact that they didn't denounce the teachers union, my local, on the false advertising, and I had to come out publicly as a victim of sexual abuse. But I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And I think victims should always have the right to decide their time and place. Sure. But it was more important. I don't think he didn't ask me anyway. I mean, to take 6 weeks, I worked down the hall, you know, at least.
Right down the hall.
Yeah, right down the hall. But it is what it is. I wish him success. I hope that, I think with having a good, strong Democratic base, they need to stand for something this time around. It doesn't do any good to have all these women out there, because sexism is still alive and well in Nevada. I ran up against that. I ran up against money. I still believe I would have won the primary if I'd gotten in a little bit earlier, but I hadn't contemplated that. Steve ran for 2 years. I had 8 months. I had $1.5 million, and he had spent $6.5 million to defeat me. So I think in the long run I made him a better candidate, and I think the voice of the people will bubble up through the Senate and the Assembly, and I'm hoping that they will all work in a collaborative way and not forget that there are Republicans that are decent people out there that they need to make sure they bring to the table.
We have a lot more, including some of June Kiliani's highlights in office, lessons she has learned, and the importance of being polite and working with fellow lawmakers across the state. All of that on LasVegasNow.com. Well, a recall effort against Las Vegas City Councilman Steve Soroka is being spearheaded by former Assemblywoman Victoria Seaman. Soroka is a Democrat, Seaman a Republican. She says the recall effort is because of how Soroka has dealt with a dispute with developers hoping to build on the now closed Badlands Golf Course. Organizers would have to collect at least 1,850 signatures from people who voted in Soroka's ward in the 2017 municipal election. Nevada Democratic Congressman Ruben Kihuen is moving forward with a run for city council. Kihuen filed paperwork with the IRS to form a political action organization called Ruben Kihuen for Vegas. He is leaving Congress after the Ethics Committee report said he sexually harassed women but did not violate House rules. Kihuen apologized for his conduct toward women but denied the harassment allegations. Steve has reported that Kihuen plans to run for Bob Coffin's seat. Nevada goes blue.
If there's any kind of regression in our organizing or that there's a loss of momentum, it could swing back to red. That's a very real thing.
The Face-Off panel takes on the election as they tell us what they think the biggest stories of 2018 were. Plus, some of the most influential politicians died in 2018. We take a look back at a year with a remembrance.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Well, Nevada Secretary of State Barbara Cegavske says it will cost some money for the state to implement the motor voter ballot initiative that passed back on November 6th. Question 5 requires people to either register at the DMV or sign forms saying that they want to opt out. Currently, the state has a system where people have to opt in. Cegavske told the Interim Finance Committee that it will cost about $250,000 over 2 years to put this in place. Cities and counties will have to bear some of the burden as well. Clark County estimated $200,000 in programming and one-time costs, up to $500,000 in staff, printing, and other recurring costs. Well, 2018 was a year with an election and a seemingly never-ending news cycle, but what were the biggest stories of the year? We asked our face-off panel, KXNT radio host Alan Stock from the right, and Battleborn at Progress Executive Director Annette Magnus from the left.
2018, and talk about what the biggest story was in 2018. What do you think the biggest story?
Well, it started out, I mean, if you're going to want to go chronologically, you had the shooting at Parkland High School in February, and then a month later you had a lot of kids around the nation walk out for 17 minutes in order to protest gun violence, and none of them had any idea what they were talking about when it came to gun violence, because when the commission on the shooting met after all this occurred, they came out with all these recommendations that we've talked about on the show, that I've recommended many, many times. Not one had anything to do with guns. It had to do with something else I brought up earlier, and that is school security. We've got to make sure that our schools are secure. Anything else doesn't matter. And they came up with these recommendations. So that was the first big story. You did have, I mean, that was one issue. I'll let you go with your big issue of the year. We got other ones, the midterm election and some others.
I was going to say, I think the midterm election. I think Parkland and other things played into the midterm elections. And I think the narrative that was painted throughout the year of accountability on Donald Trump, making sure that there's a check and balance there, you know, with the House of Representatives now. I think that's very important. And I think what Nevada did was very important, at least for our side. And so, for me, looking at progressive issues for 2019, we are set up in a much better way to make sure that those progressive issues move forward. And whether it's dealing with gun violence prevention, or talking about education in a serious way, or looking at ways to improve our economy and jobs, I think those are going to be key issues that we look at and work on in 2019. And I think in Nevada, at least, we set ourselves up to really deal with those issues in a progressive way. And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, as far as Nevada goes, you're right. I think that, you know, the big story here obviously was the midterm election and the state going from red to purple to blue. And not that it couldn't go back to purple or red, but right now, I mean, I don't care what people say on either side of the aisle, it's a blue state right now. And people can say, yeah, but we kind of, I saw some Democrats recently who were saying the last few days, no, we're really purple. All right, maybe you may think that, but, you know, I mean, I'm being honest. I think we went blue, all the offices except for Barbara Cegavske and Mark Amodei are, you know, they're all Democrat. So, I mean, it's blue. That's how it is. As I've said before, it's an opportunity for Republicans to look to see what we can do to be able to come back in 2 years. And that means focusing on the real issues people are concerned about, not some of the others.
I think the reason you see some Democrats and progressives and whoever saying it's purple is because it still truly is purple. If we let our foot off the gas, if there's any kind of regression in our organizing, or that there's a loss of momentum, it could swing back to red. That's a very real thing. And so both parties have to be serious about organizing in the state of Nevada, because even though in 2020 we won't have a true top of the ticket, right? We don't have Senate, we'll have some congressional races, but the top of the ticket will be the legislature at that point. And so, and obviously the president. And so we need to make sure we're doing what it takes to organize here and continue to keep Nevada relevant for both parties, because that is a huge risk down the road for both parties, is that Nevada goes back into being irrelevant.
Well, you can watch more of Alan and Annette's 2018 recap and their 2019 predictions, including what to expect up at the state legislature, on LasVegasNow.com. Just look for Face Off under the Politics News tab. Well, from Paul Laxalt to John McCain to George H.W. Bush. Up next on Politics Now, we remember some of the iconic politicians who passed away this year. And a proposed bill could cut down on the number of elections here in the Silver State. We'll tell you about that proposal next on Politics.
8 News Now. You're watching Politics Now.
Well, 2018 saw some notable deaths in politics, from presidents to senators. That includes some Nevadans who left a big mark on our state. Steve Sebelius has a look back at them.
They belong to different eras, different parts of the country with much different backgrounds. But the notable deaths of 2018 were all remembered for the one thing they had in common: putting the good of the nation ahead of political party or philosophy.
We keep trying to find a way to win without help from across the aisle.
Senator John McCain of Arizona was a combat pilot during Vietnam. Shot down and 5 years a prisoner of war, politics was a second career for him, one in which he earned a reputation as a maverick. McCain twice ran for president, losing to George W. Bush and Barack Obama. McCain was lauded as someone who would buck his party when he felt he was right, including his famous thumbs-down gesture that killed an attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. In one of his final speeches on the Senate floor, McCain denounced strident voices on TV, the internet, and radio. "To hell with them," McCain said to Applause. "Our incapacity is their livelihood."
I'm a man who sees life in terms of missions, missions defined, and missions completed.
It was the same for former President George H.W. Bush, a Navy aviator from an earlier era. Bush was also shot down during World War II, but rescued by a U.S. submarine. He went on to serve as a member of Congress, director of the CIA, vice president to Ronald Reagan, and president of the United States. Bush also faced a tough choice: retreat on his famous "Read My Lips, No New Taxes" pledge, or back a tax increase designed to rein in a rising deficit. Raising taxes may have cost Bush his chance at a second term. His defeat gave rise to a more strident Republican politics, one that holds sympathy to taxes as a form of treason. His civility stands in stark contrast to today's insult-driven politics.
When you're the president's right-hand man in the Senate, you don't need a leadership role. It takes care of itself.
Here in Nevada, a larger-than-life figure was also lost: former Governor and Senator Paul Laxalt. He was a friend and contemporary of former President Ronald Reagan, and even briefly mounted his own short-lived bid for the presidency in 1988 against Bush. Despite their brief rivalry, Laxalt was eventually named a co-chairman of Bush's election effort. That turn of events shows the respect Laxalt had earned among his Senate colleagues, never taking political fights personally. Laxalt would pass down his political temperament to a young Senate intern from Nevada named Brian Sandoval, who, like his mentor, would go on to serve as governor of Nevada. Sandoval, who leaves office early next year, would later credit Laxalt for his earnest, deliberative approach to political disagreements. What all these men had in common was a commitment to the idea that elections were for fighting over political ideals, but when those elections were over, it was time to govern. We've gotten away from that notion in recent years as political fights spill over into governing, and legislation becomes not a vehicle to solve problems, but a cudgel to be swung in the next election. The political fights never seem to end, and working together with elected officials of the rival party is seen as treason rather than what it once was, statesmanship. It's worth considering the example of men such as McCain, Bush, and Laxalt as we contemplate our modern political fights. They point the way to a more pragmatic politics, one that prizes accomplishment over short-term political gain. They show us that compromise for the common good is not impossible, if only we're willing to try. Back to you.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Time for Eye on Carson City. We're now just under 2 months away from the start of the legislative session. One proposed bill would match up our elections. Assembly Bill 50 would shift local city elections throughout the state to the even-year cycle by 2022. So instead of spending extra money for low-turnout contests, local mayors and city council members would appear on those same ballots as presidents, members of Congress, the governor, and state lawmakers. And there would be fewer elections if Assembly Bill 57 is approved. The measure would see 4 of the 7 school board trustees in large counties actually appointed by the county commission. Just 3 members would be elected at large in the county. Currently, all 7 members are elected from various districts across said counties. Well, Christmas is almost here, and it may be the last one that lobbyists can dole out those gifts to certain officials. Gifts to state lawmakers are already banned under a state bill by then Senate Majority Leader Michael Roberson. But Assembly Bill 40 would extend that ban to members of the executive branch and to local government officials and their immediate families. The rule would not apply to educational or informational events, meetings or trips, or to parties that everybody on a local governing board is invited to. Similar exceptions already exist for state lawmakers. Well, what direction is CCSD headed? when new Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jara will lay out his 5-year plan is coming up on Politics Now.
Prestige, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge.
You're watching Politics Now.
Well, our friends to the west, California residents are having some strong reactions to a new plan to put a fee on text messages. Student Haley McLaughlin says she likes the idea because the fee would go towards a program that offers phone service for low-income residents. The amount of the surcharge still up for discussion, but it would likely be billed as a flat fee rather than a charge per text.
Having an open line of communication is really important for everybody, and that if it's something that wouldn't cost us much and would be helpful, then I wouldn't be against it.
There should be a solution to providing low-cost phone service to poor people, and we support the Lifeline program. But having the Public Utility Commission unilaterally ram through a rule to tax us all in this very, subjective and private process is wrong.
Well, as you can imagine, the idea has plenty of people opposing it. Consumer groups say the question is whether the surcharge is really a tax, in which case they say it should be proposed by elected officials. The wireless industry wants to dial down the plan, saying it will drive consumers to free messaging service apps like WhatsApp. The state's Public Utilities Commission will take a vote on that proposal next month. Well, this is What to Watch, where we tell you what we are keeping an eye on in the future. Nevada Governor-elect Steve Sisolak will be giving his inaugural State of the State speech in Carson City on January 16th. He will give that address from the Assembly Chambers in Carson City. The speech will lay out his priorities for the upcoming year and his 4-year term. I'll be up there, and we'll be bringing you, of course, full coverage that evening and here on Politics Now. Sisolak is scheduled to be inaugurated January 7th. And newly appointed Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jara is holding a town hall meeting on Monday, January 4th at the Henderson Convention Center. Jara plans to lay out his 5-year plan for the school district. This follows the conclusion of his recent listening tour that he has held with several community members. Well, a big thank you, of course, as always, for watching Politics Now. My email is pwalker@lasvegasnow.com. Always look forward to hearing from you. We'll be off for the next 2 weeks, but you can stay up to date online and watch us right here every Saturday, starting once again in January. From the entire Politics Now team and all of us here at 8 News Now, we wish you a very joyous and happy holidays and a prosperous new year. We'll see you coming up in 2019.